Hi and welcome to the latest In Conversation podcast in association with Film Ireland. Today I am joined with the wonderful Tony Cranstoun, who is an editor who has worked, I don't know, Tony, how many years in the industry?
Yeah, as an editor, probably close to 35 years.
35 years. So I think it's fair to say, Tony, you've probably seen many different stages come and go and different technologies. But just to give our listeners kind of an idea, Tony's been working as an editor on, well, nearly every genre, but I guess going back to TV, stuff like Queer as Folk, Cracker, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Amber, actually, probably more recently as far as TV stuff goes. And then from films as recent as The Farthest, Without Name, From the Dark by Conor McMahon, A Day for Mad Mary, of course, and Gold. Then going back to Mr. Bean's Holiday, Perry's Bounty. Anything else major I'm missing?
The Royal Family.
The Royal Family, of course, hugely popular.
Yeah. That was one of my favourite kind of gigs.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, like, before we get into the actual projects yourselves, like, can you just give us even just a general sense about, you know, yourself and why editing? Like, what pulled you into this?
It goes way back for me. I was actually affected by a cut as a young child. It was a cut that my father actually made, and he wasn't an industry professional. He was a kind of home movie enthusiast. And back in the 60s, he had a cine camera. I didn't know at the time, but I'll set the scene. I was 7 years old, and we were in my uncle's garden, and he was chopping down a dead apple tree. And so the tree was chopped down. I was running around the garden, having a fun time and peering through the branches. And, you know, my father got the camera out and filmed some of this stuff. And what he would usually do, he would, you know, send it off to the local chemist and get it processed. He had a little editing bench. He would join it all together and then project it on the wall. And he used to get these stock shots, these library shots on 8mm film, and they used to they were readily available. You could buy these little strips of film, and commonly there would be like an aeroplane taking off that you'd put on the front of a holiday clip or stuff like that. And on this particular occasion, he found a shot of a tiger jumping out of the bushes. I think it was from like a kid's film in the 60s called Daktari, and he came across this shot. And in this garden scene, when it was projected on the wall at my uncle's house, there we are. There's, you know, chopping down these branches of this tree. There's a picture of me in the garden running around like a young kid. And then it cut to this undergrowth, and a tiger came out of the undergrowth and jumped over the camera. And then it went back into the garden. There was more chopping up branches, and I was convinced that my uncle had a tiger in his garden, and that was the power of this cut. It was incredible. I didn't know at the time. I was way too young. I didn't know that was an edit. Whenever I'd watch TV as a young boy, even as a teenager, I'd be much more innocent than people are today. I just believed that everything was consecutive.
It just was.
That was how it was. There wasn't any editing, but as I grew up, I got to learn about this, and that power of the cut never left me. And then when I was round about studying O-levels, I got a chance to go into an advertising agency for some work experience, and went to a day's filming and found that really, really boring. You know, it was a commercial shoot, and so the camera would turn over like once every 2 hours or so for 10 seconds, and then, you know, there'd be 50 people would be running around kind of doing stuff, and you'd just be stood in the corner trying to keep out of the way. But at the end of that day, I got taken into a cutting room, and so the commercial had been shooting for a couple of days, and so the people I was with, they brought me along to the cutting room. I went into this 35mm cutting room in Soho, and I actually saw a bigger version of what my father used to do in the spare bedroom on a little plank of wood with a couple of split spools on it. And I fell in love and realized that this understanding of what editing was, and you could actually do this and make a living out of it. And at the age of 16, having sat my O-levels, I got in touch with these people and was lucky enough to get a job as a runner in Soho, running around Soho with cans of film and
Sounds amazing.
Started in the cutting room, and look, that 7-year-old boy is still in the cutting room today.
It just made sense straight away.
It just totally did. It just clicked.
Yeah.
And I, it seems kind of bizarre to put it back to that very early time, but I think I was very much affected by that, and I love the idea that it's a cut, the power of a cut, and I've never kind of lost that belief that editing can do that. And so,
but I think you're absolutely right. Like, because I think, again, for anyone who's gone through the process of whether they've directed, but they've worked with an editing, but sat in an editing suite and watched that, I think once you've been through that at least once, that's where you realize how much those cuts count. As in, I'm still amazed after editing a number of films how just a couple of frames left or right, and all of a sudden I'm left with a totally different emotion.
Yeah, I mean, it's editing is such a wonderful filmmaking tool that when just in filmmaking, the processes that it's all of these parts which are so creative. I mean, I've huge respect and admiration for anyone making film, and editing's important, but from a guy that goes out and finds locations, to the actors, to the cinematography, to the sound recordist, to the production design, costume, makeup, there are so many decisions and so many kind of great people doing great work to realize a director's vision. But then all of these bits come into the cutting room, and they're if you're lucky, you've got lots of great stuff. But at that point, if the audience were to look at it, they wouldn't really be able to discern anything that they could enjoy as a film. And it's at that point in the cutting room where the influences of all of these people's decisions and work kind of start to come together, and the collaboration then between the editor and the director start to bring this thing to life.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I totally agree with you. I think it's a very interesting thing where people, when I talk to them about films they love, and they talk about particular performances or actors who are just incredible in those films, and with some people, I think maybe, yes, if you saw the raw footage, you may think that performance was wonderful, but it's also fascinating to me how, and not that the edit creates a performance, but actually how much it can facilitate and highlight what an actor is doing. For all those great films out there, it's a beautifully edited together scene that allows us to see that great performance. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think a badly edited film actually can hide quite good performances.
you totally... It's within your control to manipulate. That's what editing does. Just that simple decision of at the point where you decide to go to someone in vision, or you play their dialogue out of vision. There's huge manipulation goes on, but it's about feeling the emotion, understanding the storytelling that you want to tell. And if you're blessed with great script and some really strong acting and great vision from a director and beautiful cinematography, then your role as an editor is basically to keep out of the way. You want to. You don't need to do too much. You need to do enough to tell the story, but actually, it's the filmmaking isn't just about the editing. There are so many other things in play, and editing just isn't about cutting. It's also about knowing when not to cut. And you could get presented with a dozen shots for a scene, and it's kind of as when you're doing your assembly pass. For those that listening that don't know, the editor is working on this process called an assembly while the film is being shot. So every day you're getting dailies in, you're responding to them, you're putting together an assembly of the scene. And
would you actually, just to cut in there, would you normally watch dailies with the director at the end of the day, or do you actually just get it handed directly to you nowadays?
Look, back in the day, if I go back 30 years to being an assistant, working in studios, it was a regular thing that there would be projected dailies at the end of the shooting day, and that would be a film that was being shot in studios, so everyone was within the same complex. And you would have the director come back, and sometimes you'd have some of the actors come back as well as the key HODs. So there could be 10 or 20 people sat in an auditorium, and you would watch the selected takes from the previous day. You wouldn't watch every single take. Yeah. If they'd done 10 takes and they printed 3, you'd watch those 3. But everybody would watch them, and it was really useful for costume to see how the costumes looked against the design, and and makeup, just to see that the makeup was looking okay. And for the editor would sit closely to the director, and you'd have this little conversation about, you'd look at 3 takes and the director would say, yeah, I think I like the second one, and you might say, oh, there was that moment in the first take, and they go, yeah, that's really good too. And you get an idea of what your taste and their taste were like, and so you'd be able to then go away and assemble that scene. And so, having that process of assembling, you're making a stab at, here's how the scene could be. Yeah. And it's important that it tells the story. And so, when you assemble the scene, you can look at it and go, actually, that moment, there's a moment where, when I read the script, I thought that we would highlight a particular thing a little bit more than the realization of the scene brings. Yeah. And so it's your duty then to have a conversation with the director and say, I've assembled the scene. I thought the moment when X happened would have been a little bit stronger, but you've decided not to push that. It's a flag. And then the director might say, yeah, that would be too heavy-handed. I decided I definitely didn't want to do that. And you go, okay, that's fine. I just wanted to flag it. Or they might say, oh, really? You don't think it comes across? And then, modern technology, you can make a quick time and send a quick time to the director that evening. They can look at it, and you can, if they want to change it, they can change it. Or they might go, yeah, you're using take 4, but actually I think on my recollection is one of the early takes, there was a stronger beat there. And so your creative collaboration is already beginning to flower, to flower, So
absolutely, because I think that it's an interesting point, because again, for me, like, the biggest concern on a film set, if someone tells me just not to worry about it or it'll be grand, like, I think if you're taking on any role, whether it is costume or editing, like, your job is, you own that department, you own that section as such. And so if you see anything, it's not being problematic to call someone up and say, hey, do you want to just have a little look at it? Like, you were there to help them. You were there to actually,
absolutely,
you're the guard at the door,
Absolutely. And every HOD on a film is, we're all there to put the director's vision on the screen. And I think that's the most important thing. The director, whether they've written it or they haven't, they've taken this idea, they've thought about the story, they've gone through and created mood boards, and in collaboration with casting directors, they've cast it, and with their producers, they've brought this thing into being. And so everybody is there to support them, and it's a wonderful creative experience for all of us, for all the HODs that collaborate with the director to bring their vision to the screen.
Yeah, no, actually, and I think you touch on a very good point though as well. It's like and I think actually it's a concern for editors as much as for directors or producers or anyone actually, that when it comes to working with someone, let's just take the director-editor relationship because that's what we're talking about today, that actually, obviously you have to look at someone's past work and their experience, but so much of it is also personality and how well the two of you get on or have a similar, I don't know whether it's an appreciation or what, but like I would argue that relationship and that kind of connection is probably almost as important as someone's experience.
Yeah, it totally is. And I'm a firm believer that there are tons of talented editors out there, and actually the physical editing of 2 shots together in perfect continuity that just happens matter of fact. When I'm editing, I don't even, it's just a very instinctive thing that if I'm cutting on someone sitting into a chair, my outgoing shot, I go, oh, I'll just cut there. My incoming shot, I'll just cut there, put the two of them together, and that's pretty much the cut, and it rarely changes. I don't get into going, oh, I need to take 2 frames off of this one and extend that one by a frame. In your initial, that's kind of fine cutting, that's way down the line. Your initial cut is, you just put it together. So the actual editing just almost happens without you realizing that it's happening. What's really important for the relationship between editor and director is the fact that you've got to spend so much time together. So for a director, they need to choose an editor of a like mind. Now, you might be going off to direct a horror movie, and your mind goes, all right, this is a horror movie. I need to get a horror editor, so I need to, who cut Amityville? Exactly, who cut The Evil Dead? And find that person. Now, you could then meet them, and actually you're completely clashing, and you're kind of going, oh my gosh, but they cut this great horror. But if you don't feel the relationship is right for you, then your instinct, whatever your instinct tells you at that meeting, you should stick with, because you're going to have to spend months with that person in their room, in a very confined space. And it may well be that if you're directing a horror, that actually, the editor of a film like American Beauty or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, they could be the right editor for you. You could meet them and kind of go, okay, this person really gets me, gets what I want to do, and you can work with them. And I, across my career, I've edited a lot of comedy. I just got into comedy. I don't know why. I don't know that I was necessarily that funny at school, but I've edited comedy, but I've edited documentary, serious documentary. I've edited drama, and I've edited horror. So I've edited lots of different genres within film, and just because I have some comedy bones doesn't mean that I can't cut a serious documentary or a horror. And that goes for all the editors. I think
absolutely, yeah.
It's so easy to pigeonhole us, and I think that actually, if you get the director and you understand the type of film they want to make, you understand story, then
you're fine.
Yeah, then
well, no, it's weird because I'd agree with you, but actually I'd argue from my point of view the fact that you say you've edited a lot of comedy, that actually the skill set is more the reason you're able to make comedy work is you're able to recognize the moment in that scene. And in a comedy, that can be the funny moment, it could be a look, it could be a line, but actually I think it's almost the exact same skill when you're building a scary scene or a tense thriller or anything. It's more identifying the moment of that scene or the drama of it. And people think of drama as in just two people sitting around a kitchen table, having a cry. It's not. Like, the drama is whatever is happening in that scene. And actually I think if you can identify that, kind of regardless of the genre, you can build that and put it together. I don't think they're as separate as people like to describe.
No, and that's true. And actually the comedy and horror are, from an editing perspective, are remarkably similar. That comedy has to deliver the punchline and horror has to deliver the scare. And actually I think in when you're constructing scenes of that nature, you subconsciously make similar decisions.
Absolutely. I think so. Because particularly as well, because it's not even just let's say the punchline in a joke, but also say the guy in the mask jumping out of the dark. It's so much the build up to that as well. Like, regardless of how well someone delivers that punchline in a joke, actually it's everything that's happened up to that moment that can dramatically increase how funny that line will be, or how scary that jump will be. Yeah, I really think there's a lot of similarity between them. And obviously the fact that you've worked in so many genres shows that, which kind of brings me back to the bare necessity of what editing is. Okay, so a lot of people, And I suppose they're not wrong. In a very physical way, it is the act of putting one shot next to each other. Mm-hmm. But I think that can be quite a dangerous oversimplification of what is really an art form and can sometimes be a little bit underappreciated as the art form in it. So for you, what is editing? Like, what is it that an editor does?
Okay, without getting into film theory and stuff, I was very taken with the Russian filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein. He talked about montage, and I think there's a kind of, you can find it on YouTube, but there's a quote he says that editing isn't about putting one shot next to another, laying them down in a line. You think about it as putting one shot on top of the other. And so I think that's a really important thing for editors, because what that communicates to me is that shot 2 carries the memory of shot 1, within it. And so it is, I think when you're editing, you've got to be very mindful of that type of thing, that every editing decision you make, it's learning from what came before.
It is, yeah, like every image influences the next one. Actually, that's so. For people who haven't seen it, Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin is a real classic that's worth checking out. But like, this would have been, I don't even sure what year that would have been made, but like up until, or maybe even a bit after these films, a number of features were really just kind of scenes plonked together as such. It was kind of almost filmed like theater. It was just, here's this bit, here's that bit. And films like Battleship Potemkin and to some extent like A Birth of a Nation and everything that realized that actually by putting certain images before or after each other, you could dramatically either heighten or change the meaning of some of the images that you're seeing. Do you think, because I think Hitchcock famously talked about that as well, where, if you're watching like a blank person's face, but we show a kitten before it, we think that they're smiling, and how that changes what we believe in those things. So do you think that an editor, is there a responsibility on an editor for what they can do? Because obviously editing in a way is propaganda, it is manipulation. You are changing things to create a certain emotion. And do you feel that editors have any responsibility to that, say, particularly in a documentary setting, to keeping an element of truth?
Yeah, well, that.
Sorry for throwing all that at you.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, the documentary editing, that opens up a real kind of minefield, because it really depends on the subject matter and what you were trying to say. I think there's one thing to be fair. I worked on documentaries years, very early on in my career. I worked on a current affairs series called World in Action. Did that for a couple of years, and it was great kind of learning for me. And there was always a degree of fairness in the perspective of the story. You just weren't saying, this is bad. Yeah. You also had to allow room for a voice for someone to say, well, actually, I disagree. I think it's good. Even though clearly the overall subject may not have been palatable, but you were allowing someone to give a positive expression and someone to give a negative expression, and then it was up to you as the audience to watch it and make your own decision. So, fairness in terms of that, I think, is very, very important. If you're making a kind of an anti-film, then as the editor, you've got a huge responsibility in not manipulating the footage so that you're saying that, or you're suggesting that something happened. It didn't happen at that moment.
Yeah.
It happened actually a week later, but because editing is so immediate that you can put event A and event B next to one another, and if the audience think, oh, that person's really, really bad because they did this and then they did that, oh, that's terrible, I hate them, then you've manipulated too much, I think. And so there are kind of ways in documentary storytelling that you can still have those two things, but you need to be truthful that they didn't happen so close to one another. So I think there is a huge responsibility on editors in documentary to be really, really careful about what you join together, and just to be very, very aware of what you're communicating. And just because it's sexy and it kind of,
that's the temptation, isn't it? Because you're kind of thinking, dramatically this really worked, and yet it's not.
It's not truthful.
Yeah.
And so,
and I do think it's like that's one of the sad things that say maybe some TV documentary particularly has lost over the last decade or so, is where it is just the salacious stuff all crammed together, while documentaries used to be it was a presentation of something, and the belief that by watching this you will know whether it was a good or a bad thing, as opposed to just telling you one side of the story.
I have a lot of integrity when it comes down to documentary making, and if I get told by someone higher up the chain that, oh, well, there's too much information and we need to kind of truncate everything, and so we need to put this beat next to this beat, and I'm kind of going, that's telling something that isn't quite true. And as you point out, they might love it because it is sexy and it's they're going, oh, it's fine, they actually happened in that order, and you're kind of going, no, because a bit like going back to montage again, you put two things together, and what went before is carried through into what comes next. And so you just have to you have a responsibility, I think. But, as an editor, and ultimately the responsibility is with the director.
True.
It's the director's film. And if the director kind of says, that's what I want to do, then I think in all of the genres, anything that's scripted, fine, we can do everything. But if you're making documentary about a real person, specifically a real person, a real living person today, then you have a great responsibility to being truthful. If you're making a documentary about something that happened 500 years ago, then okay, there's probably a little bit more wriggle room there. But it's just
because again, I think it's only one of those things you realize the more you edit is the ability that you have to actually change these things, and I think there is a certain responsibility to how you treat that material and how you do. And actually, in the same way that I think when we're doing a fiction film as well, I suppose it depends on the script actually. Because in certain scenes you could favour one person over another, and usually that will be based on which is most appropriate for the story, I suppose, the overall arc. But if you're just editing one scene totally out of context with other things, like I could lean on character A instead of character B and make it quite a different thing. I can make you empathise with them instead of the other person. If I hold on a guy while he's getting dumped by his girlfriend, if I hold on his face the whole way, I'm deliberately bringing the user or the viewer into his world. While if I edited it a totally different way, we might actually much more appreciate the girlfriend's reason for breaking up with him.
Good editors are very sensitive to the material, and it's very important to be true to the story that the director wants to tell. And clearly some directors, again, they, depending on their point of view, they may favour one character in a scene over another character. That's the director's vision. That's what the director wants to do. If you get the material and there's equal coverage on two characters in a scene, then it's really important to kind of understand who the scene is about. What is important, and if it is a couple breaking up, then is the lead for the story kind of more towards the person that's being dumped or the person that's doing the breaking up. And so you just have to you kind of, I think you instinctively kind of know that. It is, I guess, the editing is also allows you to be kind of slightly perverse in the way that you might get kind of more emotion out of a scene by favouring someone unexpected.
Absolutely.
Going off on a kind of a tangent, but there's a reason for this. But with you mentioned earlier that kind of, or you didn't mention, I mentioned that I edited the Royal Family.
Yes.
And in that, if you watch I worked on the first 3 series of the Royal Family, and it was wonderful to do. But it was very, very different, the comedy editing, because quite a lot of the punchlines were kind of played off. it's quite perverse in a strange kind of way. But because you have this family sat down watching TV, and while they're watching TV, there are these little pockets of conversation going on. I'd been like millions of other people. We've all sat down in a living room and the TV's been on, and you've been sat there with your siblings or your parents, and conversations have gone on. And it is, I've witnessed watching TV and someone has said something out of my eye line, sat on the sofa, and it's been, I can't believe they said that. And I haven't kind of I've not been privileged to have turned in time to have seen them said it. It just kind of happened. And so everything is slightly, off and delayed. And so in the editing, I brought that sensibility to the cutting. And the director and Carolina Hearn, God rest her soul, and Craig Cash, who are the two writers, and Henry Normal was involved in the early series of the Royal Family. They loved that. They loved the thing that it was slightly...
but it felt real, didn't it?
It did. It did. If you would position the cut into a way that you cut and then they did something funny, you're kind of preempting the laugh. Now, there's plenty of comedy that requires you to do that. But for this particular comedy, it was allowing you to just witness it slightly later, and that was, and actually the writing was so strong that the line was so funny.
It didn't need
and the actors were so good in the series that something funny would be said, and you'd be looking at Jim Royal, the dad, played by Ricky Tomlinson, and you could actually open up the edit so you heard this really funny line being said, and you could look at the dad watching the telly and just see his thought process, and it's almost as if he was going, did I really hear them just say that? And he would kind of slowly turn and
that's the reality, isn't it? Yeah, it's not that people don't do it as like a double take where they quickly flip over. Actually, it's letting it process and then trying to subtly kind of look over going, no, you didn't.
and so when you're watching him, you've heard it like he's heard it, and you're going, that was really, really funny. And then you get a double laugh because he was then reacting, after you'd reacted.
But it connects you with him as well, though, doesn't it? Because, I think that's a really good point as well when it comes to editing, and that goes sound-wise as well as visually. Depending on the point of view and everything, but actually, if someone comes in with a line that's just sort of out of nowhere or that's surprising, the fact that we don't see it allows us to experience it as those characters do, because as you said, it's not a preempting thing, and it's actually funnier, because there's no kind of setup for it. It just comes out of nowhere, and it just sort of sits there.
It worked for the Royal Family, and there's a lot of that stuff, and it's an observational comedy, and so there's the editing kind of played a real role, an important role in the way the comedy worked, and the timing in that was there was real motivation for all of the editing. It was really, really important. Yeah.
Actually, it's funny. I wanted to ask you just about, while we're on the TV topic, editing for TV, because this is kind of a different art form than, say, for features, because you've got strict time limits. I presume you've got a clear segment length. Obviously the scripts are structured around that, so that helps. But how challenging is it then? Because obviously some people can deliver lines a little bit slower, a little bit quicker, to actually get those episodes in on time, even between whether it's the crime ones like Cracker or on the comedy levels. Is that tricky? Did you find it normally kind of fell more or less into place, or was it a hard thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've in truth, I've been cutting features now for quite a number of years. So my TV editing is probably close to 7 or 8 years ago since I was editing TV, and then the last number of years it's been features. So it may have changed a little bit more, and I'm sure that there are more commercial breaks and there are more pressures today, I think, in the part one of a TV episode has to be within a certain duration because they need to get the commercials in at a certain time. But the overall length, I mean, yes, you had a responsibility as the editor to get it into the running time, but you know, a lot of the TV writers are so accomplished that actually, you know, the page count on scripts, you know, it comes in very, very close. You know, it was, and I think kind of TV is kind of the schedules and everything else are so precise that actually, you know, maybe it does happen. I mean, maybe someone listening will kind of say, "Oh, I edited Game of Thrones and I had a 50-minute episode and my assembly was 2 hours, you know, and I had to throw an hour away." I mean, maybe it does happen. I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that it's the TV durations. Of course, you don't want to have a, you know, be required to cut a 50-minute hour of commercial TV and only have your first assembly coming in at 51 minutes because you've got your assembly, by dint of it being an assembly, is going to be kind of include everything, and it's going to be kind of looser than it will be when it's fine cut. And so, yeah, I imagine the scripts, they're tightly honed.
So you're somewhat protected from ending up in too bad
a although I'm sure it can happen.
Yeah.
And hey, then, you know, that look, you're one of a group of people, you know, just because you're the editor and you've got to excise something, you know, the director's got to, you know,
it's their responsibility too.
It's their work that's there, and they might kind of go, "Oh gosh, well, we have to lose that chase scene, or we have to cut that chase scene in half." But I really, really love it. And
well, can I ask you then, like, on an editing, like, just going back to just general editing, then, like, for me, I've always felt that editing was kind of like me sitting at a tennis match where I'm choosing to turn my head on who I want to watch. So it's very, like, when I instinctively edit, say, that first pass or anything, even if we're leaving it loose, it's just more, who do I think, if I was sitting in that room, who would I be looking at? And the same reason, why would I hold on someone? Because I'm kind of curious to see, how are they going to react to that? You know, like, so for me, it's emotion drives the edit much more than any kind of other structural logic. Like, how do you feel about that? What would be your approach?
I think that there's an interesting thing to discover as individual people that have you ever been to the theatre? And, you know, there you are, there's the stage, and there are actors on the stage.
It's just one wide shot.
And yeah, it's one wide shot, but you're choosing to look at different people at different times. Now, you know, you could be the sort of person that if there's an actor on the left and an actor on the right, and the one on the left is kind of has a big monologue, that your eyes never leave that person until, you know, the actor on the opposite side then has a line, and then use that tennis match analogy, you know, your head whips and now you look at the other person. Maybe that's a large majority of your audience. I'd be someone that if I was there at the theatre watching that performance, I'd be too curious. I'd be kind of going, oh, you know, that person's delivering a monologue and they're fantastic, and I'm looking at them and I'm kind of getting real power from their speech. But, you know, I'd be too curious. I'd have to kind of look over the other side of the stage and go, what's that actor doing over there?
Yeah.
You know, and actually, why are they over there? Why are they not what we term in film as being in a two shot?
Yeah.
So I can actually see the two of them. You know, the director of that theatre production has decided to put these two actors to use the whole width of the stage. And, you know, I would find myself at certain points looking over at them, and maybe again in an odd way looking at the non-speaker more than I'd look at the speaker.
Well, it tells us a lot, though, doesn't it? Because we can obviously hear what one person's saying, but seeing how it's affecting another person tells us a lot about how heavy those words are.
Yeah.
You know, because there may be information in that we haven't seen yet, but we can tell by how someone's reacting to it how important that is, or how that's personally or emotionally affecting them.
Yeah, I'd say, you know, my personal taste in film is that it's a medium of image and it's a medium of sound. And so I can receive all that information at once, and I'm, you know, my brain hears the spoken narrative, and I get it. And if once I'm happy that I know that person is stood in that corner or sat in that chair and they're delivering this speech, I'm too curious. I'm much more interested in seeing how do people respond to this speech that's going on. And so I think if I was left to my own devices, my tendency would be more on the reaction than it would on the delivery of the line. But that's not out of any just to be different. That's just a taste. That's just my taste. And maybe when I assemble stuff, I tend to kind of move more in that direction. Then a director will come in and kind of go, oh, you need to be on the character for this line, or we're not seeing enough of this character and their performance is kind of really, really strong. So
sometimes that can be good though as well, kind of, because you can actually encourage the director to have to justify why we should be looking at someone, which again informs you on what their vision is.
Yeah, and this again, with the assembly process, and for those listening that are editors out there, just in terms of process, when I assemble, I nail my colours to an assembly cut of a particular scene. I don't, I'm not an editor that cuts 3 versions of the same scene. Oh, I can cut one where it favours the speaker, another version where it favours the reactions, another one where it favours all close-up or all kind of master shots. I respond to the material and want to communicate the story. It's very important that the scene communicates what you read on the page, that it's there. It's very important. There's no justification at all for just staring at a shot of a spider web in the corner of a room while 3 people are having a conversation just because it's a lovely shot of a spider web. There has to be a justification as to why it's important to see the spider web, or the scenes about Spider-Man that is actually going to kind of affect Spider-Man and bite him, and he's going to become Spider-Man. And then, okay, there's a reason why we're looking at the spider web. But as editors, I believe that we should nail our colours, do our cut, and not be afraid that it's wrong. It's an instinctive reaction to the dailies that come in. You need to communicate your thoughts and your responses to the director, because you're not on the set. You don't know that the catering wasn't particularly good that day, or that you're looking at some wonderful actors and they're delivering a lovely scene outside a beautiful country house. And actually, it was on the flight path to Dublin Airport, and the sound recordist was having their worst day ever, and everyone was frustrated because they had to keep cutting every so
none
often.
of the emotional baggage, shall we say, that comes
none
with
of
the
that
shoot.
stuff. You're just looking at it purely as,
and yet all you see is literally what's in that frame. So whatever was left or right is of no interest and no effect on you.
The trucks could all be just kind of 20 feet to the side. You don't see any of that. You don't realise that there are 50 people the other side of the camera, all staring, all having an important role on the location. So you just respond to the pictures and sound that you get, and you make your choices instinctively to do with the story. But it's very important, I think, for editors to communicate that, even if it's shooting when production's on. It's really, really difficult to get 5 minutes to talk with the director of the film because they're so busy. So even writing a little email at the end of the day, just, "Hi, saw the rushes today, really responded to this and this. I just had a question. You've decided to realise this in a particular way, which kind of wasn't quite
How I'd read it.
How I'd read it. That's not to say that it's wrong. It's a choice, and you're just curious as to, I thought you maybe would have, given me.
Did you get any coverage there? Like, is there by any chance a close-up of this person?
But it's a delicate thing, because on film production today they have these fantastic monitors. It's not even playback of a take. Yeah, as the take is happening live, there's an HD monitor, and all the key filmmakers are all hunched around this screen watching it. They can see it as it happens, so they know. There's you can't say to the director, "Oh, that's great. I got that scene, and that's great. The master shots, works really, really well, and and there's a couple of mid shots, and they're great. You didn't shoot a close up." Well, of course they know they didn't shoot a close up, because tell them something they don't know.
Yeah.
It's.
And would you just send them an email then, or would you send like here is the assembly, like what? Or would you be troubling a director at that stage? Like, what's your approach?
No, every director is different. I'd prefer to keep them, not to show them any assembled stuff, but to reassure them that yes, the scene
is there.
I've cut the scene together. It communicates. We have clearly they've did 8 takes on a particular character, and so they've got a small, quite tight emotion, and then they've got a very expressive emotion. So it's when the whole thing's together, you might go for big emotion at that point, because it feels, it's more engaging and communicates strongly. But actually, when you've got the whole thing assembled, you look at it and you go, actually, let's go for take 2, where the actor was keeping the emotion quite small and tight, because the characters.
Well, that goes back to what you were saying about the montage being the images on top of each other, that actually it's only when you see the previous scene that we may already know how that actor is feeling, and so we don't need to see the emotion in the next one. Just even almost not a blank face, but like a stiller performance can actually still carry all that emotion which we've seen in the last one.
Yeah, and there are things, and it's quite often that something just unexpected happens within a scene. An actor gives a look, and you use that look, and that look contains so much love for another character that actually when you read it on the page, you were going, oh yeah, that's just John and Mary and they're going for a walk in the park. But then you cut that scene together and you go, oh my God, there's a real connection between these two. Gosh, they're totally besotted with one another. They're made for one another. I didn't realize that was going to come across as strongly as it did, but the chemistry just...
It's magic.
It's magic. Something happens. But then 3 scenes later, there's a kind of a scene where...
They show they love each other.
they declare their love for one another, and you're kind of going, I already know this. Yes. I don't need this scene anymore. So but the scene gets shot, or may have been shot beforehand, because
it's a funny one as well, because I find, like, say, when you're writing a script, there's part of your writing the script as the blueprint for the film you're going to make, but you're also writing it to try and express to other people the type of film you want to make. As in, sometimes you have to put in maybe a bit more dialogue than you'd need, because it's very hard to say that look. Do you know what I mean? Or that tension, because I know by 2 actors just looking at each other across the room, I can feel whether there is tension between them, whether that's happy or sad. It's very hard to write that in a script just saying they look at each other. Well, you can, but you tend to put in maybe a bit more dialogue. Do you find in an edit a lot that you're actually, where possible, trimming out that dialogue because it becomes superfluous?
One of the first things that gets reduced probably is exposition. And you're absolutely right that when you're reading on a page the story, you kind of need these helpful prompts, and there's real reason for it. The script is what is getting your funding, and so with the director and the producers, there are script editors and people that are working the script. The script goes through many versions, and it's important at that stage that everybody understands who the characters are, where they've come from, what their journey is going to be. And so there might be more dialogue than you need. But so when you get into that's just reading. It's like reading a novel. You want to know backstory on your characters. But when you get into the visual medium of a film, just by something as simple as the choices made by the collaboration between the director and the costume designer, let's say, can absolutely draw an image of a character that gives you so much backstory. The moment you see them and you see the way their hair is cut, or the design of their costume, the colours that they're wearing, you take so much from that, and you kind of go, got it, I know this character is anarchic. Then
I don't need this.
I don't need now some scenes or some backstory to show me that they're anarchic. That's the magic stuff. That's the stuff that we don't know. And it's just wonderful that when the whole creative team is on fire, the amazing stuff that a cinematographer can do with lighting choices and everything else can give you Absolutely. A feeling of a scene that actually kind of it just allows you as an editor, working with the director, to actually question, do we need this scene now? Because the cinematography has conveyed, this is a scary, spooky place. It may have been in the page as like, here's an exterior of a particular building, but the lighting, the composition, again, the design, the location, all of that stuff that you don't have on the page all comes into being. I'm then the lucky guy towards the further down the chain that gets presented with this image, and I look at it and I respond as the audience are going to respond. Yes. And I don't know any of the decisions have been made as to why that location has been. You just accept it for what it is. It is, and you look at it, and that's that's important, that you're so fresh and alive receiving that, and respectful of all of the great work and talent that's gone into giving you these images to play with.
Well, if I'm putting my directing hat on them for a minute, can I ask you, so in scenes where you may end up losing certain dialogue or not, or I know when you're editing it, you can obviously cut around dialogue by using other people's reactions or showing other people, but as an editor, how would you like that footage to come to you? Like, would you, I guess nowadays with lower budgets, quite often people only get to do enough takes just to have one that they feel is more or less usable, and then they have to move on. Would you advise people to take that extra take or two and to try it differently, or to try it like, say, let's cut out this dialogue, let's do something, so instead of you having to cut around dialogue, that there's actually a scene that has less of it in there? Like, is it much more beneficial to you for them to take an extra 10 minutes on set and to give you that scene done differently? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's the best footage to be able to give you to be able to do your job?
But that's it's so tricky. That's like hoping to have a little magic wand. What I would encourage, or have a conversation with a director and encourage them, is that when they have the take that they like, just to be mindful that kind of, I think in every single thing that I've cut, the performance on the floor compared to the performance in the fine cut has accelerated by close, it's maybe sort of 3/4 faster, maybe even a third faster by the time, if you've deleted some
tightening
dialogue,
up responses and stuff like that, like just quicker on top of the heels. It does get quicker, and and the more time you have to edit, it's amazing that by just nibbling frames and everything else, that initially you beyond that, you for a director, you'd shoot a take and you'd go, fantastic, that's great, the feel was completely right, but it's very rare that the pace of that scene, you'll nail it there in the spot.
It will get tighter just by dint of the process of kind of that, when you have the editing comes into play, and then familiarity, and then your knowledge of what's come before affects the scene, and you kind of go, okay, I don't need to hold that reaction on that character for as long because I know how they feel about this other person. Yeah. And so, the thing does get tighter. So what I do tend to encourage directors to do, and that there is never enough time, but having got the take on a master shot that they like, do another one, and if the actors are game, try and do one where they get through it a bit quicker.
Yeah.
Just as a, if they're able to, if time permits, which is very rare, but it's often an interesting thing to do.
Well, they're a bit more comfortable with the dialogue and everything at that stage, so you can get. I find like it's lovely if you've got a bit of space between, I guess, dialogue between people, because obviously you can shorten that in editing. You can't really stretch out. Well, we can, but it can be a little bit trickier. But I find when the actors deliver that line a little closer, the delivery's a bit different. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It comes with a slightly different intention. So while I can cut out gaps, there is still something beneficial of getting them on set as close to that performance as you'd really like.
Yeah, and the thing that with editing just isn't about cutting. Editing is about not cutting. You would love to sit on a shot because you're enjoying the performance, and the point where there's a change in the scene that you decide, okay, that's where I'm going to go in for a slightly closer shot on a particular character because the emphasis is changing within the scene. So that feels to me as the editor the right place to be closer to this character. It's frustrating then further down the line in the cut that when you've held a master shot to that point and then everybody kind of says, the scene's too slow, it needs to tighten up, and you're going, but the cut from the master into the tighter coverage is the right place to go because it's giving me an emotional charge.
Yeah, the impact of that.
And they kind of go, oh, that may be the case, but the master shot is too slow. We need to speed it up. And the only way to speed it up is to go into the coverage sooner. And therefore, that cut that you had has lost its impact. And you still can cut to that same person, but if we've already been closer on character A and B already, when that point that you chose to go in off the master shot to character B on your assembly cut has gone because you've taken something out of the performance in the scene. And with editing, you're redirecting the audience's view all the time. So, it's very, very subtle, but I think sometimes that if I had the choice, if I had another take on the master shot where they actually delivered the exchange slightly quicker,
you could still hold it.
Then I could maintain that cut. Now I'm talking solely from an editor's point of view, and I know plenty of directors out there will completely understand the logic behind cutting to the cover at a certain point. Sometimes those things just get lost. No. And it's not that the editing is bad. The editing has to serve so many masters. It has to serve storytelling and performance, but it also has to serve pace.
Part of, I guess, the film revolution, of the digital revolution that's come in, is things have changed dramatically on how films are shot, how they're made, access to cameras, but also accessing to editing software, editing suites. People can set themselves up at home and everything like that. And that, as a result, has, well, there's the democratization of film, which sounds like this great thing, which has actually opened up people's ability to make films, which is wonderful from an artistic point of view, but it has also made it more challenging, shall we say, in the professional world for certain people to be able to make a genuine living out of it. As in, there's a difference between people who are just doing this out of a bit of interest as a hobby type thing, and then professional people, and the cost that goes with those things. Can you talk about the pros and cons of how editing has changed that way with non-linear systems, and I guess, how maybe editors should either appreciate the importance of their department as well, and that it's not just an afterthought, especially when it comes to budget allocation.
The revolution of nonlinear technology is, what was fantastic. It enables so much more flexibility than the days of cutting on film. It's very important to kind of point out that the time it takes to make the editing decisions is still the same. And I was fortunate enough to be an assistant and an editor on film, and so the days of cutting, that point when you're assembling and you actually have to physically cut some celluloid and sellotape join another piece of celluloid together, you would look at the outgoing image and the incoming image for a good couple of minutes to kind of go, yeah, I think I'm going to make the cut there, because you didn't want to have too many sellotape joins in your film print, because then it wouldn't project very well. So you had to be quite conservative initially, and you probably overlap cuts, knowing that you would, as the process got closer and closer, you would pare them down. The explosion of nonlinear came along, and you could just go click, click, join two shots together, and if you kind of went, oh, that's rubbish, you could just go hit another button and it would
take one frame off, try again, take one frame off, try again.
Or just hit the undo button, and it would go back a step or as many as you wanted. So the whole notion of having an idea to go, oh, actually, a scene from the last act of the film, can we try opening the film with that? On days of physical film, you would have to spool that particular reel down, break the sellotape joins, put it onto a separate film core, wind that film off the Steenbeck, put the first reel up, join it in. It would take, at a good speed, it would take kind of 15 minutes or so just to do that. And then you'd look at it and go, oh, that's rubbish. Put it back again, and it's another 15 minutes to reconstitute it. So nonlinear editing allowed that flexibility for you to be able to do those radical things. But more so in modern editing now, the role of the editor, we can do so much now with nonlinear editing, and I think that I'm not alone. There are huge editors across the world will all respond to this, that we are not only cut the film, we're editing with temp music, so we're on certain budgets where you don't have a music editor, the editor is editing temp music. We have the ability to add sound design and sound effects and atmosphere. We have the ability to manipulate the cinematography. You can resize stuff, you can flop it, you can adjust the racking, you can, if something is a little bit too bouncy, you can stabilize. Yeah. I mean, and even simple VFX stuff, simple compositing or picture-in-picture manipulation. I mean, huge amount of stuff, and that's all part of the storytelling. Then you add on to that we can do title design and simple graphics, and some editors that I know, they have After Effects, a separate machine that actually they can export stuff and work on After Effects and do some really stylish title work. Things like, someone's having a mobile phone conversation, and rather than cutting the two sides of the phone or hearing the conversation down the phone, they kind of go, actually, we want to put a little, iPhone speech bubble and have the text from the conversation actually on the screen. That's kind of quite complex to do, but on After Effects, you can actually mirror the same graphic displays that you have on your iPhone and attach it. And so all of these things come into play, and that's what an editor does. And there's a lot of work that's required to be done that actually is only there for the editing process. you are going to have a team of sound editors come on board. You are going to have a composer join you and kind of, write the score, and you are going to have a graphic designer that will create all your graphic work. You'll have visual effects teams that come on to do all the visual effects, but you need to have the skill to be able to do these things, because the picture resolution that you're dealing with is immense. I remember that, when nonlinear first came into being, the picture quality was kind of like so pixelated, and it was really quite difficult to see the image.
Very hard to edit a performance when you can't actually see what's actually happening in the frame.
Big blocky kind of, and on a wide shot you just had these blocks, and you were kind of having to, you would have to sort of reference the good quality material and check the time code to see, they don't blink there, or that's good. Whereas now, I'm about to go onto a film, and I think that they're going to be, it's a studio film, and they're going to be shooting kind of 6K, and my rushes will be DNX 115. I mean, the picture quality will be stunning, absolutely stunning, and the cut in the Avid, which will have kind of temp music and sound design and maybe some graphic work when it's done in 6 months' time, we'll test it to audiences in a cinema, and it will be a split out from the Avid, and it will be kind of projected in an auditorium in front of a couple of hundred people, and the quality will look amazing. And so we have to have that skill. It's a requirement. It's just that expectation. People don't feel like it's a proper film otherwise. And so that's a real challenge for an editor, because you'll get a huge volume of material on a big film. You might get 2 or 3 cameras, and there's a huge amount of material to marshal and to organize. Organization is for me, maybe it's because of my background in film, but organization is really key.
And this is where we're talking about actually when you get the footage initially, like actually before you even start putting anything together, how essential it is to break things down. Like, how do you approach footage actually when you get it in?
I will always insist on having an assistant editor. I think that the role of the assistant editor is really, really important in terms of organising. Clips are called by their slate taken scene number. I organise them into individual scene bins. So if there are 100 scenes in the film, I'll have 100 different bins within my Avid or Final Cut project, depending on what system I use. And there'll be I have them in a folder that I have kind of scenes that are scenes to cut and scenes that I have cut. When I edit on my timeline, I don't actually edit individual scenes, and so I have 100 different edits. I actually kind of have one assembly edit, which starts with one scene with a caption either side that says "scene missing," and then I gradually build it from there.
Okay. So you organically build it into the one timeline.
So I have kind of one assembly edit. So actually, at any point, I can spool through the first week of edited or assembled shooting, and I can see all those scenes. And if I have scene 17, and the next day I go in, I have rushes for scene 18, then I can reference scene 17 and kind of go, okay, this is. I'll reread the script again, but I'll kind of see what I assembled for scene 17, and that will influence me when I cut or assemble scene 18.
So you would assemble scene 18 directly in between say scene 17 and scene 19 that are sitting there, like you'll just build it straight in there.
And so I for those editors listening that'll understand this, I tend to edit in trim mode, so I'm pulling and pushing the timeline with me all the time. So I quite often I might sort of, extend one track that's going to the left of my timeline and another one that's moving to my right. But that's the way I work. So my timeline is fluid and is always in sync and is staying with me. And I also designate, because you can cut on a number of tracks, audio tracks, I dedicate the first 4 tracks on my timeline to being production audio, and then I dedicate the next couple of tracks to being sound effects, and then the next couple of tracks to being atmospheres, and then music. And so I'm very meticulous in when I'm kind of cutting on the timeline, that I label them so I know what they are, but I keep my timeline very, very tidy, so that if at any point, my assistant needs to spit out a cut for a composer to watch, she knows that kind of tracks 11 and 12 are, or she needs to split them so they're on a different track so the composer can hear them or choose not to hear them.
Yeah, I think actually, see, again, it depends, because if people have started off with short films and everything, it's kind of a bit easier to get away with lack of preparation on those, because there's less of a film there afterwards. But I think that kind of discipline from the beginning is something that massively stands you, particularly when you're talking about audio, actually, just because when it comes to the end of the day, if you have different sound effects or dialogue just spread across, 20 or 30 tracks, it's incredibly laborious to have to go back. And there's also a strong risk of either muting the wrong thing or even taking something out that actually belongs there. And it's just a nightmare when it comes to handing it over to sound mixers, because of course that responsibility tends to fall on the editorial department to deliver it in a lovely tidy way for the sound people, because they don't want to look at it that way. So definitely I think that kind of discipline from the beginning, as heartbreaking as it can be, really pays off.
But you've got to put the picture and sound down on your timeline, so why not put it onto a dedicated track? You know, just because when you open a clip, it automatically A1 and 2 go to A1 and 2, but if it's a sound effect, just drag them down to A7 and 8. And
it becomes pretty natural after you get used to it. Like, just at the beginning it can seem slower, but
I think once you've organized that thing, and I do find that even when I've a very, very busy cut, if it's an action sequence or something, maybe I need to have 6 or 8 production tracks. And so I tend to on the Avid, I tend to have my picture window for my source and record monitoring kind of really small, and my timeline really big.
Okay.
But I like to have a very large monitor, so that actually I'm always looking at a large output monitor. So whether I'm looking for a source clip or an edit on the record clip, I can see it big.
You can see it big, yeah. Which I do think it's a funny thing that I remember catching me off when I first bought a Mac. I was editing off, I must have been Final Cut 6, I'd say, but it was it was the biggest screen they had at the time, but I think it was like 19 inches or 20 inches. And you get used to looking at the edit of your film, and it's a small part in the top right-hand corner, and an edit might look fine there. And yet when you watch it on a bigger screen, all of a sudden it falls apart. Like, it's something to be really aware of.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're cutting for cinema, then, you want to try and get as big a monitor as possible. And I saw one recently that was like a 65-inch monitor, and it's it's fantastic. And if you're fortunate to be cutting with sort of DNX 115 footage or upwards of that, then having a big monitor does give you that kind of envelops you in that cinematic arena, and is really, really helpful.
Especially, again, it's seeing what's in the scene, though, isn't it? Because those details, they do matter. Like, on how much, especially wider shots, I guess, as well. Like a close-up, and actually, as an editor, you're probably more likely to lean on the close-ups if you're editing on smaller screens, because at least in that one, you can be very sure of what you're seeing. But, like, so I know you edit a lot in studios, but then when you're working at home, what sort of setup do you have? How's the room kind of laid out? What do you like working with?
It is rare that I'll work at home. I like the discipline of going somewhere to edit, and on lower budget films, I've edited in the director's spare bedroom, or their study space. Clearly, on bigger films, you're either in a studio or a facility house. When I'm at home, I have a I like to edit on. If I had a preference, it would be Avid, and it would be a two screen Avid and an output monitor. I don't have a sound mixer. I use the sound mixer within the Avid. So I do quite a lot. I'm sure all the editors listening will say, yeah, so do I. But I do an awful lot of audio editing, and I think we have to. It's a requirement. So you're kind of putting in a lot of audio edits, invisible audio edits, and ramping the sound down with a kind of an audio dissolve. I know there's a function on the Avid where you can actually do like a live mix if you have a little kind of mixing desk, so you can actually feel it. You can feel it. I don't go for that myself. I actually kind of like to get in there and go, okay, at this point where the dialogue finishes, I'm going to kind of put a cut there, and I'm just going to ramp the audio up, but not necessarily from kind of the point where the dialogue starts. I might kind of do a little sort of 30 frame audio dissolve, so it's just coming up under you don't hear it come up, and so, I'm quite meticulous about that when I'm.
That can be very important as well, though, to knowing if an edit works, isn't it? Because, like, if the dialogue is cutting or chopping, it's very easy to make you feel that your edit isn't working and actually might be just perfect.
Yeah.
Visual edit, I mean, of course.
Yeah. And also with the audio thing, because the backgrounds vary so much. It's a personal bugbear of mine, but I hate it when you're cutting between a couple of characters in a scene, and you're hearing traffic noise behind one, and then it goes, and because the other person is in a different part of the room and there's no traffic noise behind them, and you get this kind of shh, and I can't watch the scene like that. I have to what we commonly call in days of film, finding a bit of fill and actually scouring through when the clapperboard kind of goes before they call action. You can often find that if you're lucky, there's a second of atmosphere there, and so I would certainly build up the noisier track in a scene with as much fill, so that and just ramp that so that it plays. And even though that background sound may ultimately get ADR'd, we may ADR that dialogue, and that background is no good to us. I still feel the need to just make it smooth. I wouldn't just put there's traffic behind that, I'll just get a traffic loop and lash some more traffic on, because that just makes it worse. So
if people are then, like, if they're setting this up at home, obviously depending on people's budget and availability, like, I think most computers now can work pretty efficiently. Like, you can edit, I'd say, at least up to 2K footage on most computers now. 4K, you're going to want to be pushing it a bit harder. But, like, so would you advise them on, I definitely agree with you on, say, a designated room, at least if you have to do it at home. But are you talking your two monitors directly in front of you and your export monitor on the wall behind you? Would you have it off to the side?
Yeah, my output monitor is, I always have it to my right. I'm left-handed, and so I tend to, I have my keyboard and mouse favouring my left side, and my monitor is always to the right. But yeah, the editing, I mean, I appreciate the budgets that people have to edit at home sometimes. It can be fairly unhealthy because you lose the discipline of the day. I think when I was a very young assistant editor, getting into the way the studio kind of hours used to work, that crew would be on the floor at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then they'd wrap at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and they would watch rushes. It is good to have a strict an editing kind of timetable in your head, that you don't exhaust yourself too much, that just because this is my first week of editing, and you end up being in front of the machine till 11 o'clock at night. I think that there is, it's good to discipline yourself, because when you're in the edit, your brain, it's very, very hard for your brain to switch off from it. And and I think that to complete your day, and whether you want to kind of you have some hobby or pastime, or you want to go for a walk or something, it's good to just take your focus away from it. You'll still think about it, and when I'm cutting, certainly when I've cut here in Dublin, and I've been at some of the facility houses around the place, I walk home. I find that at the end of the day, whether it's raining or the sun's cracking the flags, I do actually enjoy the fact that I can walk home for 30 minutes and just let those let those editing kind of thoughts just work their way out. And sure enough, sometimes when you're kind of faced with an editing problem, it's amazing what the brain does. That you're going, oh gosh, I'm never going to be able to cut this scene. I just can't get the thing to work. And all of that information goes in, and then when you sleep on it, hopefully it doesn't keep you awake, but you go into the cutting room the next day and you look at it, and all of a sudden the thing just kind of goes, and the edit just works. It all comes together. And
and that brings up a very interesting point, though, with again, limited. But it's always sad to have to talk about like a creative thing within regards to limitations. But I guess that is part of the reality of film and movies. They're expensive, even the cheapest ones. It's actually having the space to allow that edit to find its kind of natural place, and as a result of that, it's how long is a piece of string thing, but how long do you think people should be budgeting for an edit, say, of their feature film? Say we're talking a 90-minute film.
Yeah. Look, it varies. It varies so much. It's quite common on bigger films. The after the shoot, a director would get 11 weeks for director's cut. Now I can hear some filmmakers out there going,
falling off their chair.
I've got 6 weeks to get to picture lock. So it does vary very hugely. The one thing that I would say to directors and any producers that are listening is that just look at how much a shooting day costs in comparison to how many editing days you would get for that one shooting day. And I think the figures can sometimes be incredible, that one shooting day is equivalent to months of editing. I don't know the figures, but
well, no, actually on bigger productions, I'm sure.
And the return you get for a day of editing is phenomenal. The time spent with the cut, you're taking all of these wonderful bits that the rest of the crew have helped the director realize, but they all come into the cutting room, and then you just there's no substitute for time, and there isn't a finite amount of, one can't say that, okay, 37.3 weeks is what you need to edit a film. Film is, you never finish editing a film. You have to stop at some point, and hopefully you're on the crest of the wave when you stop. You're not coming down the other side. So that but yeah, so it is a bit of a kind of how long's a piece of string, really. But I think the cost of an editing day compared to other areas of production is quite cheap, but the return is really high, and it is just the editorial team and the director in a room with an Avid or a Final Cut Pro or whatever you're cutting on. It's a very creative environment, and considerably cheap compared to how expensive other things are.
No, well, it makes sense. Actually, I was kind of curious even then, before we wrap up, when it comes to when you're getting towards the end, you've done a number of passes, and the film is sort of there. Do you, on even a bigger budget film, do you get to take a little bit of a step back from that film? Is there, or is would you be lucky if you just had a weekend before, you know what I mean, just to be able to come back with those fresh eyes, to be able to do a final tidy up or not?
Yeah, I think it's good for the director to be able to take time. I think with the editor that there is always something to do. When you get into fine cutting, you do have a mental list. Like there are 1,000 things. Oh, I must look at that transition, or I must look at that join, or I just want to tidy up that audio, or that music edit's not very good. There are loads of things that are passable when you're just going through, and to be able to keep the director as fresh as possible. Some directors love to be in the cutting room, all the time. Some just like to come in, give you their feedback and go away again. There's no.
Which do you feel is more beneficial that way? Actually,
they're all good. I'm open to.
You don't mind them being over your shoulder?
No. Quite often, a director will be in the cutting room. They'll just put headphones on and sit there on Netflix and kind of watch a TV series on Netflix or something, and you can just kind of wave at them, and the headphones come off and kind of just show you this, or they're on their emails, and it's fine if they want to be in the space with you. That's good. Some are very attentive and kind of want to be very close to you and are fascinated by kind of what you're doing, especially first-time directors who are like thrilled at the chance, and they see.
Well, it is exciting watching this coming together.
And I appreciate that, because I can, I remember as an assistant editor, on film being stood behind the editor and the director, pegging trims and watching them, and they'd be having a discussion, and I'm going to think, I'm just going to kind of have the close-up of this character ready, because I'm sure they're going to want to go there, and then the editor turns around and asks for a completely different shot that and I'm kind of going, oh, okay, and I'll pass them that, and where I thought they were going to go, they went somewhere completely different. And so, there is a wonderful alchemy in editing of that collaboration between the creative collaboration between the director and the editor is when it fits and it works and you're on the same page, it's just a wonderful experience.
Perfect. Okay, well then, just lastly before we wrap up, then, for people who want to get going in editing, I think there's definitely an element of like valuing your craft, and actually, this is the tricky thing of like working for free and everything like that. But like, are people best getting out there, get editing short films, whether it's working for free or not, get going? Or how do you think they should approach it? How do you think they should get into this industry?
Yeah, my advice would be to try and discover where you want to express yourself as an editor, because you can. If you join a facility house as a runner, as what they would call an assistant editor, isn't as glamorous as you might think it is, because you're in you're not in the cutting room, you're in a kind of a machine room in a different part of the building, and you're constantly watching blue lines go across computer bars, making quick times or transcoding rushes. And if you're, and you do a bit of syncing up and hand some kind of bins over to the editor, and you don't get the experience of actually being in the room with the editor. So that's one role, but that can be very soul destroying. And I do know a number of people that have gone down that route, and then they've gone, I've just given up, and just, this isn't, not enjoying. They've not enjoyed that process at all, and the hours are very, very long, and it's not creative really at all. It's just very mechanical. So on films where there is a film production, there is an editorial department. I would get in touch with the editor or the assistant editors on those things, on those type of productions, and try and get yourself in on some work experience. I know it's terrible, even if it's voluntary, to just go in and hang around that environment and see how that environment works. And if you get an opportunity then to get in as a sort of production runner or a second assistant, editor on a film, and if the team works well, then editors are very, very, very loyal, to their editorial staff. I have a first assistant who I've worked with on a number of productions, and she's coming with me onto my next film. And I'm picking up a second assistant for the first time on this production. So, and we've all met and we all get along great. So this could be the beginning of a journey through 2, 3, 4, 5 films. And, quite often a second assistant becomes a first assistant, and then you bring in another second.
So working your way up, treating it like, I guess, as any other career out there, is being willing to start at the bottom and earn your way up.
And learn the craft and be around that. And it's weird if you choose the environment that you want to get into, whether it be reality TV or television drama or comedy or feature film, the people that are involved in that production are going to do it again and again and again, hopefully. And so, if your face becomes familiar, if you're the first assistant with an editor and you've worked with a particular editor on 10 films and they have a relationship, so, look, a lot of director-editor relationships repeat themselves. And so as a first assistant, you could be the first assistant with a director-editor on a number of films, and then a film comes along and the director's going to shoot it and the editor isn't available because they're on another production. And if they've had you around for 10 films, and during that time you've edited a teaser trailer or something on a number of films, because you get those kind of opportunities. And say the editor took ill for a few days and you needed to step up and get in the chair because they needed the cut to continue, you might have had that opportunity. And then the director, once they know you, they might kind of go, okay, well, Tony's on another film, but they might give me a call and say, so I was thinking about your first on my next production. What do you, how do you think that would go? And I go, great, my first is kind of,
That's true. If you're not seen, no one's ever going to
really keen to wants to edit, is waiting for the opportunity. You should definitely meet them and talk to them. And those stories, I suppose they're kind of rare, but they do happen. If you're familiar to the team that you're working with, then opportunities can arise. But it is difficult, non-linear editing. As you were indicating, a lot of first-time directors, because of budget, they end up cutting the film themselves. And I think there is no substitute really for the collaboration between an editor and a director. I think that yes, some directors have to do it because they have no money.
Yeah, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Because I hold my hands up having edited Crone Wood myself, but that really was as much out of necessity and because I came from an editing background myself. But I would very happily have handed that over to someone else, because I think there's no way you could look at that footage, especially actually on smaller productions, because the pressure is so high, that you could ever have that eye that say you would have come to the project. Because even for me, when I thought I had a final cut, I went to the board with it. They had a look at it with Rory Gilmartin, and it was amazing to me how he made a couple of suggestions, and it was bizarre because it was a couple of months after I thought I had picture lock on it, but it gave me that freedom. Once I took these few bits out, all of a sudden I went through the whole film and I took 8 minutes out of it, and it seemed so easy, but it was just having someone else to be able to say to me, maybe, that you could trust as well, though, actually. And that trust was very important. And the respect.
The trust is really key. And, if, for directors out there that, if you find the right editor and you engage and, the collaboration is sound, that there's total trust, then it really is a great experience. And, and editors, people that train as editors, they look at things in a way that is really unique. They're really, I can't quite explain what it is that happens in my brain when I look at the rushes, but it is kind of like it is kind of as natural as an audience sees it, but it is with total technical proficiency and knowledge of performance and story and everything else. But there is a real innocence in the way that you look at the rushes. You're not you don't carry any of the issues that happened on the floor. It's
and actually then I think is a good kind of wrap up point of something you mentioned before we started recording the podcast, actually, that for people when you're starting out, whether it's a small budget thing or even if it's your first feature, whatever it is, don't be afraid to approach the experienced editors. Actually, people are much more open than you think to being able to chat and talk to you. It doesn't mean necessarily they'll be able to come onto your project, but they may be able to point you in the right direction, recommend to you and everything like that.
Absolutely. And the thing of having an experienced assistant, that maybe if the project's not for you, you can say, actually, I can recommend this person to you. But if you have a tiny budget film, and why not approach a cinematographer that has cut some Hollywood movies? They can only say no.
Yeah.
And the same with an editor. You can, just because they've cut a big movie, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to turn your.
I think people are more friendly than people imagine sometimes as well. I think people are a bit intimidated by that, but actually more often you may not get a reply to an email or something, but more often than not you will. And actually quite often people are at least willing to give you a coffee or to chat to you on the phone or something, Yeah.
And if you read the script, and if you really like the script and you like what the director's vision is and how their approach, and you get on, then it can happen, and quite often, when you're working on sort of, I always view the opportunity to work on a bigger film actually allows you to do some of the lower budget films, so you can actually balance the two together. And the lower budget films can be equally rewarding, and sometimes more so, because creatively you have to just step up a little bit more than maybe you would do if you've got a huge infrastructure around you and a lot more support and a bigger team. So
perfect. Tony, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today. Really, really appreciate it, and I hope people found this interesting.
Yeah, my pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks.